The first Hulk I ever knew wasn't this one. It was Edward Norton Hulk from 2008. I didn't even own the DVD. I borrowed it from someone, and I watched that movie over and over again. I still remember how different it felt from every superhero movie I've seen before. Hulk wasn't cracking jokes. He wasn't a member of the Avengers. Yet, he felt dangerous. Every time Bruce Banner lost control, it genuinely felt like something terrible was going to happen. That was my hope. So a year later, when I came across this figure, my first thought was, why this guy gray? Honestly, thought someone had just repainted the Hulk. Maybe it was an alternate universe version. Maybe it was some special edition comic I haven't read. Turns out, this wasn't the alternate version at all. This was the original. Welcome back to I Want It, where I paint an action figure I want to own, while diving into story that make them special. Sometimes that story about the character, sometimes it's about the people who design them, and sometimes it's about a tiny piece of history that's completely changed the way you look at something you have known your whole life. This Grey Hulk was one of those moments for me. The more I looked into him, the more I realized that almost everything I thought I knew about Hulk actually came later. Back in 1962, Marvel wasn't the giant company we know today. Superhero was making a comeback, and Stan Lee was looking for something different. Instead of another clean-up hero, he wanted a monster. Not an evil monster, a tragic one. He often talked about taking inspiration from Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. The idea of a man who becomes something he can't control wasn't new, but placing that idea in the middle of the atomic age made it feel fresh. Nuclear power fascinated people, it also terrified them. Gamma radiation became the catalyst, and Bruce Banner became the unlucky scientist caught in the middle of it. Of course, none of that would have mattered if the character didn't look interesting. That's where Jack Kirby come in. If you spend any time reading Marvel comics, you probably heard people call him the King. When I was younger, I always assumed it was just one of those nicknames comic fans gave their favorite artist. The more I learned about him, the more I realized, no, he actually earned it. Kirby had this incredible ability to make characters feel larger than life. Captain America, Thor, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the list just keep going. His fingerprints are all over Marvel. And then there's the Hulk. Looking at Kirby's original Hulk now, it's funny how different he felt compared to the version most of us grew up with. He's not incredibly tall, he's not covered in veins, he's not built like a bodybuilder, he is square. Everything about him is blocky. His chest is massive, his shoulder look like concrete slab, his brow hangs so low over his eye that he almost look like he's glaring all the time, even when he's standing still. If you cover him in black and remove all the detail, you still recognize him immediately. As an illustrator, that's something I really admire. A good character design doesn't rely on tiny details. It starts with the silhouette. Kirby understood this better than most anyone, and I think this is exactly why this Marvel Legends figure stood out to me. When Hasbro announced it, they didn't paint another Hulk gray. They actually committed to recreate Kirby proportion. The heavy forehead, the thicker lips, the shorter, stockier body. Even the expression feel like it's jumped straight off a comic page. It isn't trying to modernize him, it's celebrating where he came from. The funny thing is, the gray color almost didn't survive comic history. When Stan Lee first imagined the Hulk, he specially wanted him to be gray. He couldn't want reader to associate the character with any particular ethnicity, so gray felt like a natural choice. It was a good idea. The printer disagreed though. Comic printing in the early 60s wasn't exactly consistent. Some issues came out with the Hulk look almost black, some look light gray, sometimes the color changed between pages. Imagine creating a brand new superhero and not even knowing what color he going to be when the reader buy the book. Eventually, Marvel gave up trying to find the printing process. Starting with the second issue, Hulk turned green, not because the story needed it, not because gamma radiation suddenly looked differently, because green was easier to print. I love that. One of the most recognizable character design in comic history exists because of printing limitation. It's such a human story. We tend to think this legendary character was planned from the very beginning, like every detail was carefully mapped out decade in advance. But sometimes history just artists and editor trying to solve problem before the next issue has to go to print. And somehow, those little decisions end up becoming permanent. The Hulk stayed green. The grey version slowly faded into history, at least for a while. Of course, Grey Hulk didn't disappear forever. If you've been reading comics for a long time, you probably know that Marvel eventually found out a way to bring him back, not at a mistake, but at his own personality. Years later, while Peter David completely changed how people look at the Hulk, instead of treating Banner and Hulk as one character with different moods, he explored the idea that Banner's mind has fractured into different personalities. The Grey Hulk eventually becomes Joe Fixit, a street-smart casino enforcer who wasn't as physically strong as the Green Hulk, but made up for it being clever, sarcastic, and surprisingly manipulative. I love that idea. Instead of pretending the old Grey Hulk never existed, Marvel embraced him. A printing limitation accidentally created one of the Hulk's most interesting personalities. Sometimes the mistake becomes the best idea. But this figure isn't Joe Fixit. This is something even earlier. This is Hulk before all of that, before multiple personality, before Hulk smash. This is Jack Kirby monster. And I think Hasbro understood exactly what made that design special. When I first saw a promotion photo of this figure, I wasn't looking at the color anymore. I was looking at the shape. The proportions are almost identical to Kirby's earlier work. He's shorter than lots of modern Hulk figures. His torso is ridiculously wide. The chest almost feels bear-shaped. Everything flows into a huge shoulder that make him feel unbelievably solid. If you compare him to more modern Hulk, you'll notice something interesting. Modern Hulk often look like professional bodybuilder who kept growing. Kirby Hulk doesn't. He looked like a force of nature, almost like someone carved a giant out of rocks and somehow brought it to life. I think that's why this figure feels so different sitting on the shelf. It doesn't just represent a different point of Hulk history, it represents a completely different design philosophy. And then there are the butterfly joints. Those are amazing, seriously. Look how far back they move. That's not something you usually expect from a figure this bulky. Most large figures end up sacrificing movement because of that muscle. This one doesn't. You can actually pull a shoulder back far enough to recreate those huge Kirby wind-up punches. You can open the chest, twist the torso, spread the arm wide. Suddenly, those old comic panels don't just look possible, they are posable. Get it? Posable. That's one of those little details that tell me something on the design really understood the assignment. They wasn't just making another Hulk, they were making this Hulk. And I think that's an important difference. Then there's Bruce Banner. Honestly, I smiled when I saw him. He's tiny, awkward, wearing this plain little outfit with oversized glasses. He looked exactly like someone who would get shoved into a locker at school. Standing next to Hulk, it's almost funny. You don't even need to know the story, you immediately understand it. One man, one accident, two completely different lives. Sometimes action figure don't need elaborate accessory. Sometimes one action figure say everything. As I was painting this piece, I kept coming back to something. When I was younger, I didn't really care who drew Hulk or Spider-Man or Batman. I just liked the characters. Now, I think I care as much about the artist. Jack Kirby wasn't trying to create something that would still be famous 60 years later. He was just doing his job, drawing the next comic, meeting the next deadline, trying to make every page more exciting than the last. I wonder if he ever imagined that decade later, people would be collecting toys based on those drawings. Probably not, but here we are. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. The more I work on this painting, the more I realized that I wasn't painting the Hulk I grew up with. I was painting the Hulk that made everything else possible. Without this version, there wouldn't be the Hulk from the 2008 movie. There wouldn't be the Avenger. Every version that came after started with this simply awkward grey monster from 1962. I think that's something I appreciate more as I get older. When you are a kid, you usually experience characters at whatever point they happen to exist. You don't really think about where they came from. I definitely didn't. The first Hulk I loved was Edward Norton version. I love how angry he felt. Every transformation felt like Bruce Banner was desperately trying to hold something back until he couldn't anymore. When Hulk finally appeared, it wasn't supposed to be exciting, it was supposed to be terrifying. That version stuck to me for years. Even now, when I think about Hulk losing control, that's still the version I hear in my head. Lately though, I've been exciting for completely different version. I'm recording this before Spider-Man Brand New Day came out, so I have no idea what actually happened in the movie yet. But seeing Hulk appear in the trailer immediately got my attention. Not because I want another huge CGI fight, I just want to see Hulk feel angry again. It feels like Marvel were taking him in a different direction. I understand why character change, story evolve. Some people really enjoy Professor Hulk, and that's completely fair. For me though, I have always loved the side of Hulk that feel impossible to contain. The version that look like every second is trying to explode. So I'm hoping this movie bring a little of that back. Maybe by the time you're watching this, I will already know if I got my wish. One thing I do know is that making this video had completely changed the way I look at action figures. When I first started collecting reference image for this episode, I thought I was researching a toy. Instead, I ended up reading about comic printed in the 1960s. I learned more about Jack Kirby. I found myself staring at old comic panel, trying to understand why this Hulk looked so powerful, even though the anatomy were completely unrealistic. Then I started comparing those drawings to these figures, and suddenly I could see all the decisions Hasbro made, not just the obvious one. The shorter proportion, the butterfly joint that let you create Kirby exaggerated poses. It stopped feeling like a modern action figure. It started to feel like a love letter. And I think that's my favorite part about collecting. Not owning things, understanding them. Because once you know the story behind something, you never look at it the same way again. That's exactly what happened to me with this Grey Hulk. A week ago, I would call him the Grey Hulk. Now, I think of him as Jack Kirby Hulk. That's a big difference. This figure reminds me that every character we love started as somebody sitting at a drawing desk with a pencil in their hand, trying to make something cool, trying to finish another deadline. Probably never imagined that 60 years later, someone on the other side of the world would still be talking about those figures, talking about those drawings. I think that's pretty incredible though. Maybe that's why I wanted this figure so much, because every time I look at it, I remember where I started. One monster that wasn't even green yet, and somehow that was enough to create one of the most recognizable superheroes in history. I hope one day this figure ends up on my shelf. Sometimes they become something even better than the original plans. I think that's a pretty cool lesson for artists too. Sometimes the mistake becomes the thing people remember. Thanks for spending some time with me today. If you enjoyed this episode of I Want It, I really appreciate if you subscribe. There's so many figures I still want to explore, and every one of them has a story that deserves to be told. And if you like to support the series, there are links in the description below. Every bit of support goes back to the research, the artwork, the production, and hopefully one day bringing this figure into the studios so we can keep discovering the story behind them all together. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next episode of I Want It. Chicken out.